We used to think that our fate was in our stars, but now we know that in large measure, our fate is in our genes. This quote from James Watson accurately depicts where the focus of medicine is heading. DNA, considered the blueprint for life, has puzzled scientists for the majority of the 20th and 21st centuries. The United States Department of Energy, while partnered with the National Institute of Health, launched the Human Genome Project, which began in 1990 with the purpose of identifying all of the approximately 20,000 to 25,000 genes located in human DNA. Since the inception of the Human Genome Project, scientists have begun to unravel the mysteries contained by our DNA. During February of 2011, I volunteered with Champion Athletes of the Ozarks. Champion Athletes was officially established in March of 2002. Their mission statement states that their purpose is to build self-esteem, self-confidence, and everyday life skills, therefore enhancing the lives of children and adults with disabilities through education, sports competition, and new opportunities. Through my experiences with Susan Miles, the founder and president of Champion Athletes, I learned a great deal about the lives of those dealing with mental disabilities. Champion Athletes gives those dealing with mental disabilities the opportunity to enjoy and experience athletics. Their programs range from golf and bowling to soccer and basketball. To better understand some of the conditions that individuals at Champion Athletes suffer from, I chose to interview Susan Miles.
We started Champion Athletes of the Ozarks 9 years ago. We talked with a group of our parents and our athletes. Sports is wonderful. You can teach a lot through sports. You obviously know that. But we also realized parents were asking, what do I do when my child is ready for a job? What do I do when my child needs housing? What do I do when my child can't read? How do I get through the IEP, which is their school plan? So all of these things that we weren't addressing, we were addressing just one side of the individual. So we formed Champion Athletes, which has a large focus on life skills, so that we could address the whole individual and the needs of the whole individual and find those resources and make those things happen that each one of our athletes needs. We work with almost any disability. All of the individuals in our program are MRDD, is the term that is used, that's mentally retarded or developmentally disabled. Some of our individuals also have a physical disability. They may have a dual diagnosis, but we work with almost any disability. We have individuals that are blind, deaf, cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, autism, maple syrup urine disease, trisomy 1. We have some that are very, very common and some that are more rare.
The basis of my research paper originated from my time at Champion Athletes. It began when I was working with some of the athletes because I wondered whether any forms of medicine existed to help them. After performing some research, I found an answer to this question: genetic therapy. Genetic therapy is a technique used for correcting defective genes that are responsible for disease development. The procedures involved with genetic therapy are generally very complex. However, modern genetic therapy is often performed by use of a vector. Vectors are viruses that have been reprogrammed using specialized chemicals to carry corrected human DNA. After the virus has received the corrected DNA, then it is injected into the patient. Once inside the patient, the virus will attach itself to the host cells and it will replace the host cell's DNA with the new DNA, which will correct whatever condition the patient originally exhibited. After the host cells have performed mitosis or cellular division, the patient will begin to exhibit normal health conditions. To better understand genetic therapy and its applications, I interviewed Dr. Laszlo Kovac, a biology professor at Missouri State University and an expert on genetics.
Okay, genetic therapy is essentially replacing genes that are defective in the genome. So what you can do is you can introduce a copy of a gene, a normal functional copy of a gene, which is originally defective in the genome. So you can do that. You can carry it on a vector. By vector, we mean a virus, for example, which has enough room in its genome to carry an extra gene. And that extra gene, that cargo, if you will, is the normal functioning gene for a human being.
But what kind of help could genetic therapy provide for individuals suffering from mental disorders, such as those at Champion Athletes? Not all of the conditions found at Champion Athletes are treatable by genetic therapy. Conditions such as cerebral palsy occur when damage is dealt to the brain of a developing fetus or a newly born child. However, a condition such as Fragile X syndrome is caused by defects in the DNA, which make it a perfect candidate for genetic therapy. Fragile X occurs when there is a mutation in the FMR1 gene, which is located on the X chromosome. Fragile X syndrome is the most commonly inherited mental impairment. These mental impairments can vary from learning disabilities to more severe cognitive disabilities. I encountered only 2 individuals suffering from Fragile X syndrome during my time with champion athletes. Other conditions such as Down syndrome and autism were much more prevalent. While conducting research on whether or not genetic therapy is a viable option for individuals with Down syndrome or autism, I found conflicting theories. Dr. Kovac provided me with some clarity on the issue.
I think something like autism could, if they figure out if it's a genetic disorder, but I'm not sure that's known. That's a genetic disorder yet. I think that's still in the cards. What causes autism? If any disease that is nailed down to a mutation, that is determined to be caused by a mutation, a mutant gene, that could be theoretically corrected. Now Down syndrome is a different story again, because Down syndrome is trisomy 21, meaning that you have 3 copies of chromosome 21 in the human genome, so you have 1 extra copy. So by introducing virtually anything, it's not going to help. So the current approaches probably will not work unless you would be able to introduce a very, very large number of genes, antisense genes that would downregulate all the genes on the chromosome 21, but that's very difficult. I don't think that's even considered. Well, genetic therapy will provide, eventually, I believe, will provide some solutions to some genetic defects, mostly for mutations. However, Fragile X syndrome is a unique type of mutation in which we have a trinucleotide, a 3-nucleotide repeat that is repeated many times, many more times than it should. So it's over 50 or 200 times repeated. That has very serious consequences for the nervous system. And so that is very difficult. It's going to be very difficult to correct, because there is something there that causes some instability to the chromosome itself. It's possible that they might be able to express a normal functioning gene for that particular gene that's affected by Fragile X syndrome, but you have some additional problems there. You have an unstable chromosome that you really have to deal with.
If genetic therapy is capable of curing some of the disorders found at champion athletes of the Ozarks, it would lead one to ask, why is genetic therapy not being developed to a greater extent? Currently, the United States and the European Union have placed several bans on genetic therapy. These bans allow only for clinical trials of somatic cell gene therapy, and they do not allow for any sort of germline gene therapy research to be completed. Without the allowance of germline gene therapy, it will be impossible to prevent these genetic defects from happening. It will only be possible to lessen the impact of the disorders by treating the somatic cells of the individual. Despite all of the promises that gene therapy has, countries all around the world have banned its practice either partially or entirely. Although genetic therapy has the potential to cure many common genetic disorders such as Fragile X syndrome and autism, breakthroughs are unlikely considering current funding and research levels. Individuals suffering from genetic disorders such as those at champion athletes will have to wait for any sort of relief or cure from their conditions. It is unfortunate, but until the bans on genetic therapy are lifted, genetic therapy will be unable to provide the medical field any sort of cure for these disorders.
Yeah, it's a difficult question. What will happen with germline gene therapy? I'm pretty sure that gene therapy for somatic tissues for individuals will be eventually functional and be applied. There's no question about that, and research is being done on that. Germline therapy is a bit of a question, of course, because that has some connotations of genetic engineering of humans, but it's not exactly that. It's a difficult question to say what will happen. probably it will, if it moves slowly, it will move very, very slowly forward, if at all. But definitely, gene therapy for individuals will eventually be possible and will be commonly applied.
It is difficult to conclude on a topic where much of the information remains theoretical, but from the information that I have uncovered, I have determined that many of the individuals participating with champion athletes could be helped by genetic therapy. For now, genetic therapy remains as a new frontier. For scientists and those dealing with genetic disorders, the hope remains that genetic therapy can solve the complex problems that occur in the human genome. Genetic therapy may contain the answers that scientists are looking for, but until its waters are better tested and its limits better understood, those answers will remain hidden.